Welcome everyone to our Q&A with Matt Leacock, the designer of the board game Daybreak and also the designer of the hit board game Pandemic. Matt, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Sure, thanks
Um,
for having me.
so I'm going to kick it off with a couple of questions, um, and then I would invite folks to also post your questions in the chat, any questions that you have for Matt. And this is just an informal Q&A session, so uh, anything you want to ask Matt is fair game, I believe.
That's yeah, I'm an open book, so go for it.
All right. So uh, for those who are unfamiliar, Daybreak is a game that came out recently um, in 2024, right? It's been a year now since
Uh,
its release.
I'm having a hard time remembering. It might have been late 2023. I have to
All
write these
right.
things down because I forget.
Time sure does fly.
Yeah.
And it's a game about tackling the climate crisis. It's a really deep and yet also highly accessible tabletop game. I've been thoroughly impressed with it every time I've taken it to game night, just in how much emergent um, how much emergent gameplay there is, and how different each game feels from the last. And Matt, I would love to just start things off by asking you, what was it that inspired you to start working on a game about climate change after working on a game about global pandemic?
Yeah, I actually had to kind of like remember, and I think what really spurred it was an email I got from a climate scientist years before, maybe 18 months, 2 years before I started working on Daybreak. I got an email in from a guy named Declan Finney. He's a Scottish guy, and he basically just sent me a wall of text talking about the importance of the climate crisis and the severity, and encouraged me to adapt Pandemic. I've got different versions of Pandemic, and he was encouraging me to make a climate version of Pandemic. And here's all the different ways you could like change it in order to model the climate crisis. And I saw, like a potential need for a game like that, an audience for a game like that, but I also didn't really see the mapping of it very well. I mean, Pandemic is kind of like it's a bit of a fantasy, right? You're just a collection of like superhero scientists who run around the world and solve a pandemic. Just the, three or four of you. And I didn't see how that would really work well. So I just kind of shelved the idea. But then during the depths of the COVID lockdown, I started a lot of us were a little more introspective at that time. I started thinking about like how I might be able to make games that were more meaningful, and I thought of that email and thought about doing a cooperative game about the climate crisis. And I was experiencing a lot of anxiety over it myself, so I wanted to learn more. So that's when I started kind of digging into it, and it was about that time that I saw Matteo Menapace posting to Twitter about um, he had seen an op-ed I had written for the New York Times and commented on that. And we just started an exchange over Twitter and found out that we had shared interest in the topic, and we started to dig in and do research and started to collaborate on the game.
All right, so that is uh, is one way that teams form over social
Yeah,
media.
I actually did not meet Matteo in person for 3 years. We worked. He was in London. I was in. I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it was only pretty recently that we got together.
That's wild. So those of you who are forming teams here that are globally distributed know that you're not alone, and you can make very successful games without even actually meeting in person for years. Matt, you talked a little bit about fantasy and kind of how the fantasy of Pandemic was a little too abstract to implement climate change and the dynamics of that and really help players understand it. Can you talk a little bit more about like what was it like finding the balance between fantasy and reality across the development of Daybreak? And what were some of the larger challenges that you encountered as you tried to find that balance between realism and abstraction?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot there. Boy. And those were a lot of the really important early discussions Mateo and I had. First of all, we wanted to create a system that communicated the dynamics of the climate crisis to some extent. And I didn't see that in Pandemic. If you've played Pandemic, it just kind of adds cubes onto the board, and it was just a different system. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. So then we needed to figure out how are we going to model this for players? And one of the early questions you ask yourself is, well, what kind of agents are the players, right? Who do they represent, and what kind of decisions can they make, and what's the scale and scope of it? So we investigated that for a bit. Pretty early on, we decided we wanted the game to be more focused on collective action rather than individual action. So we didn't want you to be like an individual, like a scientist or a quote researcher, right, from Pandemic. So we wanted to pull the camera back a bit and show the bigger picture. And so we ended up having, and this is partially influenced by our sources. We had read a book called The 100% Solution by Solomon Goldstein Rose, and I think so. We later found out that he plays games and he play tested the game for us, which was great because he's one of our big sources. But that was the first time we kind of saw this big systems picture. Like, hey, he's like, this can be solved. It's not this scary thing. I mean, it is scary, right? But the fact that you could see a solution was very exciting for us, and we wanted to see if we could model that in the game. We were able to look at the major players that he had in his book and add one more, and that became kind of our four players. So that was one thing. Like, how do you model the players? What is the scale and the scope? And like how do we want to frame it? We didn't want it to be about like reducing your carbon footprint. And we also wanted to pull up from cities as well. It wasn't just like, well, you play this city and it represents all cities, which I think would have been a legitimate solution as well. We just wanted to model it much higher. And then it becomes, like, it became like, how do you communicate how severe this is and still have players win? And what are the decisions they're making and all that? And that was sort of like the next phase of looking at modeling a cycle of, how do you decarbonize? And then after that, like how do you mitigate carbon? And then in talking with our advisors, really looking at adaptation and the human cost of everything and trying to make that front and center. So it wasn't just quote, war on the carbon atom, which is what we were accused of at first, just as sort of like technocratic fantasy that, oh, we can solve all this with technology. It's just about taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Talking with their advisors, it was very clear that, that's part of it, but that is absolutely not the whole story. You really need to communicate more nuance and the bigger picture. So a lot of it was, came out of the research and then conversations with our advisors, but all along really trying to make sure that we have the framing right and the terminology right. We're not like contributing to misinformation, first and foremost, but then also trying to communicate to the players in the terminology of climate and the topic. And because we saw that as a really great first step. Like if you get people sitting down and playing a game about um, this crisis, you've already got a major achievement right there. So I think I've danced around that, but I think I covered your question.
I remuted myself. I heard
No
you
worries.
mention a couple of things that stuck out to me there that are really good for teams to think about as well, which is the collective versus individual action. We've seen that actually as an obstacle in environmental psychology, that if you focus too much on individual action, it can make people feel personally responsible and guilty and actually disengage with climate content. And then you also mentioned that um, there was some balance to be found between climate mitigation, reducing, focusing on reducing carbon dioxide emissions, and then other more human-centered topics like adaptation and climate resilience. So making sure that the infrastructure that we have is built to help protect people from the climate impacts that are already locked in. So I just wanted to highlight that for our participants. And by the way, for folks who have joined since we started, this is an open Q&A. So if you have some questions of your own that you'd like to ask Matt, please post them in the chat. We'd love to hear from y'all. Matt said that he's an open book, and I know a lot of you are right now in the ideation stage of the jam. So if there's anything that could help you with brainstorming ideas, now would be a great opportunity to ask. All right. Um, Speaking of ideation, so Matt, for those of you who have missed it, has put together a very comprehensive blog on the development of the game. I just posted in the chat. What inspired you to start working on a blog documenting the game design process for Daybreak? And what were some of the challenges that you encountered while trying to document the evolution of the game?
It actually wasn't that difficult. I mentioned that Mateo is in a different country, right? He's many time zones away. So we would meet a couple times a week for an hour or two, and then we'd have playtest sessions as well. But all along, we maintain a design journal, and I do this for all my projects. And I just find it's a great way to document decisions and communicate with each other and talk about to-dos and whatever. This big reverse chronological design diary, or I guess design journal is what we were calling it at the time. And that ended up being over 700 pages long over the course of the 2 years to, well, really more like 3 years. I think it was about a year of solid design. Where it was just him and myself, and then we got the publisher involved, and they were really excellent in helping develop the game. So another year with them, and then a third year of product design and marketing and getting the game to market. So it was about 3 years all in. And when we were done, we really wanted to share a lot of the thought processes that went into it because it was to some extent a data-driven game. We had a lot of input from various sources. We wanted to communicate what was behind it, and so then it became kind of like an exercise of going through the 700 pages and trying to extract the main ideas out of it, so it would be digestible to other people. So you would want you wouldn't want to go through those 700 pages of notes. It's kind of a mess. So yeah, we started with the models and we looked at the framing. We looked at what are the antagonists and try to hit on a lot of the decisions we made along the way. So that was a fun journey to try to retrospective looking at what we had done and trying to communicate it out.
So you baked down 700 pages of notes down into a dev diary, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, and the diary is, I mean,
sounds like a substantial task in itself.
it took some time. Mateo was quite good at this, so I had an excellent partner in that. I couldn't have asked for a better partner, actually. He was great on the database end. So Daybreak is a
Mm.
huge game. There's maybe 10,000 words in the rule book and all in the game itself, and then another, call it 90,000 words on the website. And then we're localizing that into several languages. So it's up
Mm.
in German now. We're working on other languages. I'm not sure exactly what the plan is to do other locales, but as other countries release it, they can always point to that site, and then we can do browser translation at the very minimum. But we really want to get that information out to people. So having somebody wrangling all of that data was super helpful, and he was great at that.
Awesome. So for those of you working on some game jam games, some jam games, uh, might be a good thing to do as well is just think about how you can keep information nicely put together in a database.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first and only game I think I've actually had a database going while developing it. But often we'll use like Google Sheets for just real simple tabular information, and then I think a design journal is like a must for any kind of, especially if you've got more than one person working on it. You need to be able to document your solutions, your problems, your meeting notes. I think it's just really, really helpful to have that.
All right, we have our first question in the chat. So I'm just going to read this from Ian. Ian says that my team is ideating, and I think the hardest challenge I'm running into is trying to gamify a topic like this. How abstract is too abstract? When dealing with natural disasters, it's mostly preemptive and post-disaster action, but trying to create design during the event, our design space, seems a bit fantastical. Do you have any advice?
Fantastical. Um, I mean, I think it can be really handy to start very abstract, just because I mean games are really complicated and they can get very complicated very quickly, and your game is always more complicated than you think it is. So abstraction can be really, really helpful. I mean, your models are going to be wrong no matter what they are, but they might be useful, as they say, right? All models are wrong, but some are useful. So I would look at, yeah, I mean, and it's a massive problem. So I would probably encourage you guys to come up with something narrow and abstract and focused for your jam. And then you can always expand out on it. But I think you're probably going to do better erring on the side of abstraction. Like if you take Daybreak's core, it's fairly simple, and then it's got all this like it says fairly simple skeleton, and then we got all this musculature and other stuff on top of it. But it wouldn't hold together if it was like a really complicated beast. So yeah, I wouldn't be too afraid of too abstract, I guess is the long and the short of it. You might be able to come up with a very simple card game that shows one simple dynamic of the crisis that helps paint a picture in people's brains, and that could be super helpful. And it might get people sitting around a table enjoying that and talking in the language of the problem and talking about solutions and so on without having to have something very complicated. I don't know if that really helps, but yeah, I guess I just encourage you not to be too afraid of things that are abstract.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
I can just chip in my own 2 cents as well, which is uh, abstract and realistic don't necessarily have to be opposites as well. There's ways to model, as Matt mentioned, like one dynamic of the climate crisis without necessarily having to model the whole of it, which I think um, Daybreak is very ambitious in how it really attempts to tackle the climate crisis holistically. But for a game for this jam, you can also focus in on one specific climate impact or one specific dynamic, and that's a really good way to start with something a little narrower in scope.
Yeah, I'll also add that abstraction can be handy, especially when you're dealing with serious topics like pandemic. The human populations are that are infected are cubes, right? They're not. You don't actually see the sickness. You don't see the people perishing, etc. And so that layer of abstraction can be handy in a totally different way.
Yeah, it's a really good point. The abstraction can also make the game a little bit more not just more age appropriate, I guess,
Yeah,
but also can help navigate barriers around political pressures or people's deeply held beliefs. Um, I'm going to jump into a couple more chat questions. I definitely have a question around
sure.
that for you, Matt, but let's go to Bell's question, um, which is what sort of software or other tools did you use to work on this game remotely with others? I'm especially curious about playtesting in an online session.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, we were doing this during lockdown, and then we also had the geographical distance. So we used the Tabletopia at the time. So it was like a online environment where you could play or playing cards IO maybe. I think we used both of those actually. Yeah. So they're both environments where you can set up like digital decks of cards and deal them out. And there's no logic or intelligence baked into the environment, but you can put up cards and then manipulate them, like drag them around and form stacks and that sort of thing. Again, I was fortunate that Mateo was pretty handy with this kind of stuff. This is not something I've done with any of my other games. I don't really like using those online environments. They were really handy for play testing with our advisors, though. So if you need to do a lot of remote testing, or testing over like on Zoom and have a place to interact with other people, whether they're play testers or your code designers, they can be pretty handy. So there's like Tabletop Simulator, Tabletopia, Playing Cards IO. I think there's more of them available. And then in addition to that, it'd be like we just use like Adobe tools like Illustrator and so on, and a lot of the Google suite for sheets and um, docs. Nothing too exciting there. Um, I typically like to do a lot of remote testing where I make a physical prototype and mail it out to people and then have them play in their home remotely and then video record themselves and I just observe the footage. So when we're done with our Q&A here, I'm going to just lock myself in my office and watch a couple hours of footage that way. Um, but that's slower. So I think those digital tools can be pretty handy, especially when you're working at a distance with other co-designers.
Awesome. And how much remote testing versus in-person testing would you say that you conducted? I know testing was a really, really crucial part of iterating on the game.
Yeah. A lot of I guess a lot of the early in-person testing was just myself and family and stuff because again we were in lockdown. Then we did a lot of remote testing on in that simulator environment, and then we went into remote testing with physical prototypes, and we did that for quite some time. We started doing that maybe 6 months into development, and watched some agonizing video where people just could not win the game, and then proved it to us by literally just choosing whatever card they wanted in the game and saying, I still can't win even if I choose my cards. So I have good memories of that. Yeah, it is it can be slower, but you can get really, really, really good data watching. I like if you're looking at, especially cooperative games, you're looking like emotional journey and watching people interact on tape. It's really hard to beat how good that is. It really, boy, it really inspires you to make a good prototype to send out and make sure that your rule's complete and so on. But it is, like I said, it's time consuming. I wouldn't swap it for anything though. I think it's the best data we get.
Awesome. Would you say it's some of the best data that you get because you can't be there to help
I'm
make
not
any
there.
correction?
Yeah, yeah. So even if I'm sitting at the table, people are always like looking over at me, to see if they're doing something wrong, looking at my reactions and so on. And I know it colors the feedback. And now that's not to say that I don't do that. I do that early on for sure, especially when the rule book's not complete. We'll be the living rule book at the table, teach the game, watch them play, and then interrupt if something goes haywire, and then do hot fixes. And it's very messy and horrible and wonderful. And I think that's a really important part of the development process is just kind of like, and also playing it yourself and like feeling what the other players are feeling. It's just very difficult to also like, because you have to be like in the game playing it and also above the game looking down on it. And then also sort of like to the side developing it from a third perspective. That's tough. But I think it's also kind of super useful to do early on. So
Mhm.
it's just that later on, when you're really fine tuning and finessing stuff, nothing really beats you know, doing a remote testing.
All right. So there you have it, folks. Board game development must be challenging just because your presence at the table can always influence the feedback that you get just by
Yeah.
sitting there, even if you're not saying anything.
I will also say that I'm probably that may not be the best advice for competitive games at all. I mean, like I do a lot of cooperative games, and so when you're watching people on video playing a cooperative game, there's a lot of talking. And I'm trying to imagine like watching a competitive game where you get like two people just staring at a board. You're not going to get you're not going to get a lot of data that way. So it may not be the best solution for every game, but it does work really well for cooperative games.
All right. So we have our next question from Chris. And Chris, I'm going to modify your question a little bit because you're asking, would it be fine to use something fantasy based as a metaphor for a message our game is trying to send? Which the answer to that is absolutely, if you feel like that's the best way to approach this jam. There are lots of games that have taken a fantasy based approach to um, climate communications, and uh, arguably it can be very effective because it helps. Uh, it's again an abstraction that helped us move away from anything that might be too polarizing and might get a knee-jerk reaction from people to really engage with the deeper dynamics. I am going to modify your question just a little bit though, and ask Matt, did you ever consider a more fantasy-based approach to talking about climate, or was from the start the um, model of having it set in the real world, was that something that you had planned from the start?
Yeah, we had planned it from the start. I think it was probably influenced by pandemic, which was like very on the nose, right? Yeah, we wanted to really tackle it head on, and I think it was very therapeutic for Mateo and I to do all that research and kind of like see a model of the real world and how, there could be this potential bright future and then wanting to share that with everybody. So we did that was part of the goals really is to communicate real world solutions. But yeah, like you said, I could see doing some sort of a analogy or yeah, like a I don't know, Lorax adjacent thing where you see this sort of like fantastical world and then you can kind of like map it onto the real world and there may be some power in making that leap.
Absolutely. And I'd argue that Final Fantasy VII is one of the very best examples of a environmental activism game that we have. And that does a lot of fantasy abstraction and yet has still inspired a whole generation to be environmentally active. Um, Before we jump into our next chat question, Matt, in your devlog you talk a lot about the resources that you were using as kind of the core economies of your game, and
Yeah.
I believe you had economic power and political power as your two
Yeah, the
resources for a while.
financial capital and political power. Yeah.
Financial capital and political power, got it.
Yeah.
And you made a really bold move at one point that was really interesting to me, and that is still a really core part of the game toward uh, removing a lot of resources that players would need to keep track of, and instead having cards be the resources themselves. So, for those who are unfamiliar with the game, there are some cards like this one here. Oh, I don't know if you can see that very well. Maybe if I dim the light here a little bit. Um, there we go. In order to activate the effects of this card, you have to discard a card. So each action comes with an opportunity cost in effect. And this was a leap that you made mid development. Uh, what like can you describe a little bit of
Sure.
what that really big leap and big change meant for the game, and how that what you like how you went from having a game that had a lot of resources to keep track of to this more simplified version, and what you saw as the potential benefits of that.
Sure. Yeah. If any of you have played Terraforming Mars, early versions of Daybreak were a lot closer to that. Essentially, you'd have a card. It had a technology or policy on it, and then it would list the financial capital or political power or both that you need to spend from your little tableau in order to put that card into action or like into your set of cards. And Mateo and I just kind of pulled those costs out of the air. But we figured that would work. We wanted to show that some things had a higher political cost, other things were very, very expensive capital-wise, and other things had a mix. But in playtesting, our games were running like 4 hours, and there was just a lot of time spent like min-maxing, trying to figure out like how do I get the most bang for the budget I've got. and there was a lot of time spent just collecting these tokens and managing them. So you put a card into play, and you'd have to like spend these cubes or coins or whatever and get change. And then, you want to transfer some to your fellow player. It's just a ton of manipulation and a ton of bureaucracy, essentially. And we took some inspiration from games like what am I thinking of? Race for the Galaxy, Tom Lehman. It's got a number of games that use cards as currency. And so that when we made that shift, which is a massive thing, we had to change like a couple hundred cards. Um, it opened up the game so much because suddenly all that bureaucratic layer was gone. That layer of like, I guess we were showing this level of fidelity that was just not true. Like we didn't know how much stuff really cost, and our game wasn't refined enough to actually meaningfully represent that. So we were able to kind of like abstract that away and talk about things, as you said, as opportunity costs. At the time, those cards are actually called opportunity cards, so they were literally opportunity costs, which is kind of fun. And then it just introduced. So first of all, the bureaucracy is gone, and then we introduced these agonizing trade-offs. Like I can roll out this really great solar project, which has got like this grid tag. It's great, but I really need to protect my community over there, so I need to spend it as a card in order to, get two more resilience so that I don't get more communities in crisis and risk the loss of the game. Or do I just hang on a little bit longer and roll that out, and then I'm able to decarbonize a little bit more, and all these kinds of trade-offs were then suddenly forced on the players, and they had to figure out what to do with that budget instead of like 26 political power and 16 financial capital that they could like micromanage. It's like I got 5 cards. What am I going to do with these? And so it simplified things, and the playtime came down, and the I guess the tension and the difficult trade-offs really bumped up. So
Mhm.
it was a long time to do that, but it was definitely paid off.
Yeah, I think just the fact that you went into that mid game just blew my mind a little bit when I first learned of that, just because of how big of a change it is and how much work it must have required to rebalance everything.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, it's a couple
really
hundred
cool
cards,
stuff.
and they were not I mean, we kept track of stuff in the database, but it was always like trying to keep those things in sync was a nightmare because we were like literally hand entering them into our Illustrator documents. So if we wanted to update all 200 cards, it was just going through and doing that maybe 3 or 4 times.
All right, we have some more questions from the chat. I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but Christian is wondering, when talking about testing, would you say it's better to have a developer watch over the playtesters as they play it, or having the playtesters figure it out themselves?
Oh, that really depends on where you are in the development process. So early on, definitely just teach people, and you might not even know how the game works entirely yourselves. I mean, sometimes these things are like improvisational sessions where you have an understanding of maybe 3/4 of the rules or something like that, and you sit down and you kind of work it out in real time, and it's very messy. And you definitely want to recruit playtesters who understand that up front. If they're not going to have a good time necessarily at that stage. They're more like helpers. So that's in the early raw stages. But later on, when your rule is complete, you can teach the game and have people play it, and then just watch. And then after your rules document is like a little bit more tight, you can hand them the rules and just not interrupt them at all and watch. But it's sort of like as the fidelity of the prototype gets better and better, your involvement should shrink, ideally to zero, and to the point where you can just like not be in the room, which is where you get really great data. But at that point, you've invested tons into all that fidelity of the rule book and your prototype and so on. So it's more difficult to change. So it's a real tricky balancing act. You can change things mid-game, early on. You're just using card sleeves and paper or whatever you're prototyping with, and it's really, really fast and loose. But you're at a different level. You can't just let people fly on their own when you're doing that.
Mhm. And I imagine I know a lot of the jammers here are working on digital games, and there's some differences between
Yeah,
the
I really
challenges of
can't speak to that.
modifying
Yeah, yeah,
a tabletop game and a
yeah.
digital game.
for
but there are
sure.
some parallels as well, right? Like
Yeah.
once you have a code base in place, then making drastic changes to the game design, it might actually be more difficult with a digital game
I
in
would
that
think so.
regard.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I came out of tech and I did a lot of UX for software, but we did paper prototyping early days, and I loved that stage because it was we could just make the changes just on paper. I don't know if people still do that anymore, but that I mean that definitely influenced my tabletop process as well. But I don't know what the typical thing is these days with digital games, and I can only imagine that there's a much bigger upfront investment to get the thing playable in the first place.
Sounds like a great question for our jammers here. If you are planning on working on a paper prototype during the prototype stage of the jam, like post in chat. Be curious to know how many of you are thinking about that. Um, Speaking of kind of ideation and prototyping, we have a question from Dylan. Do you think ideation is relevant through the whole game making process?
I think I don't think you ever want to like close the door, but the door does close gradually over time. Um, so I think it does make sense for you to challenge your assumptions as you go. But yeah, I mean, if you spend a year or two on a game, and you should have some confidence that things are working as you go, and that confidence should build and build and build. So generally speaking, you don't have some sort of like crazy idea coming out of left field. That totally disrupts your your game and forces you to change it. But I do think it's really helpful to be open to new ideas as you're going. And I'm working on a game that I've been working on for like 15 months now. And the last session we all met up, this being my two co-designers, and talked about just basically challenging the basic premises we had and
Hmm.
asked some what ifs and said, basically like just kind of like testing it. Like what do we is this assumption really true? Right. And we ended up going like, oh, okay, yeah, I think we're on the right track. And I think the game's stronger for that because we all have additional confidence that the initial plan is really good. So I think it's really good to be open. I mean, there's that, what is the saying? Strong opinions loosely held. Like I think it's great to like hang on to those opinions, but if you get new data that says, hey, there's something wrong, you should be open to that and be willing to make a change. Like that example with the currencies. We were well into it, the development, maybe about a year, and it was a pretty big change, but we weren't going to release a game that took 4 hours to play. So we needed to do something, and that looked like a good solution. So we went for it. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Sounds great. It reminds me as well a little bit of the development. I don't know how many folks are familiar with Terra Nil, um, but the designer of the game really challenged their assumptions early on. Really asked themselves, what they started at first. It looked more like a city builder, and they really asked themselves, what is the best currency to have in this game? They ended up moving away from having monetary currency toward having ecological currency,
Mm.
and the entire game evolved from there. It was really fascinating, and there's a GDC talk available that I can post for folks if you're interesting. If you're interested. All right, I'm going back to a question from Avery, which is, can you give any advice on game balancing, such as managing action economy and resource gathering, keeping players engaged without making the game too hard or too easy, etc.?
Yeah, right. I mean, balancing is something you're going to be doing the entire time. And I think of it as something that you just got to keep the train on the tracks. You don't want it to tip over while you're playing. Um, and I'm not sure how far I can take that analogy, but I try not to balance too much early on. I want the dynamics of the game to really be working. So I just want to make sure that the engine's humming along and things are working well. And then gradually you just refine things. I think the best rule of thumb I've been given was like if something feels a little bit off, try doubling it or halving it. I try not to make like lots and lots and lots and lots of incremental changes because I I just never know when to stop sometimes. So many times when balancing, if someone feels a little bit overpowered, I'll cut their power in half, or if they feel underpowered, I'll double it just to see just where is that edge. And then it's just a matter of iteration then, keeping track of the different, whether it's player powers or card powers or what have you, in order to keep them kind of in a reasonable cone. And then your cone of uncertainty just kind of gets smaller and smaller as you keep developing over and over again. Um, so that's some of the rules of thumb I've got. I think there's anything else on that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's a matter of taste. I'm generally not. It may matter on what kind of game you're developing. I try not to get too obsessed in making sure everything is perfectly balanced. I'm looking for good enough feels right and looking at how the players are reacting to things more than are they balanced on a spreadsheet. So I do a lot of more uh, less quantitative analysis than many people. But that may have to do with the games that I'm developing too. I'm much more concerned about like the emotional reaction of the players than I am about someone who's going to like try to break the game by like playing a deck builder, 200 times in a row. Or, I'm not designing a collectible card game where that kind of level of balancing may be super important. So, yeah, essentially the rule of having or doubling and lots of observation of humans and lots of iteration is sort of my tool set.
That's really interesting because I can see that as an advantage of sorts playing, sorry, working on a cooperative game versus a competitive game is that you don't have to worry too much about if players find a way to like implement a dominant strategy, then it's they're gonna celebrate that instead of one player feeling frustrated at that because another player
Yeah,
is
yeah,
winning
yeah.
it
So
all the
that
time.
that may be like a yeah. I don't have as much experience as some, I think, in this area where yeah, if you've got a competitive game and you've got a dominant strategy and people say, oh, your game is broken because we just always do X, Y, or Z. I haven't had to confront that a whole lot. I can think of some cases where I have one competitive game called Era where where you're competing for different buildings, and one of the buildings ended up being a little bit more powerful than it probably should have. And yeah, I think I would have found that if I had a more robust tool set. Let's just say. So,
All right. I don't know if you know Machi Koro at all,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Matt.
We don't play that because that, yeah, yeah. That's it was fun like twice, and then we are like, okay, that's not working. That's not working for us. That's a good example.
It's just always, yeah, always about those flower gardens. Um, uh, we have in the chat, by the way, we have at least one person here who's planning on drawing out parts of the game and moving them around. Not exactly a full paper prototype, but still should be beneficial from Bell, which I think is a great idea. And something about having physical, tangible pieces can help a lot with ideation. Um, and I'm sure, Matt, that you had a lot of physical pieces as you were doing a lot of early ideation for Daybreak. Um, what did you for those who are working on paper prototypes, is there like a easy way to be able to build those components and start playing around with those? Like, do you have like a set of I saw in a lot of screenshots that looked like you had little cubes that you use
Yeah, I mean,
pretty consistently.
this is all just off the shelf bits that I've collected over the last 20 years. So it's nice to have components, but you can raid any games just for easy things to manipulate, whether they're cubes or dice or pawns or what have you. And then for paper, I never go through the trouble of like mounting anything on like I go to some of these Unpub and Protospiel events, and people have got like mounted game boards. I'm like, what are you doing? The game boards I make are, always on paper and just tiled and taped, and they'll get one or two plays, and then they're done. Then the next iteration's off the printer. So I like to keep this stuff pretty disposable, and so game boards are always just tiled paper, and the cards are always just slips of paper in a card sleeve because you can just pull them out, scribble on them, and stick them back in, and they're really easy to iterate on. Um, so yeah, disposability is kind of key for me, just so I don't get too attached to anything, and I'm always willing to iterate.
I think that's really great advice to everyone here is don't worry about doing too much too early. You talked a little bit about balancing earlier, Matt. And that's a trap that I've fallen into personally is uh, doing too much balancing too early, and then
Oh
when
yeah,
everything is perfectly balanced and you need to make a big change for the qualitative experience of the game, then you need to go rebalance everything, and that
yeah.
can be a huge time waster.
It looks all great in the spreadsheet. You get it all balanced out, and you get that satisfaction, like, oh, everything zeroes out, beautiful. And then you play it, and it doesn't work. You're like,
Yeah,
oh no, and all that time is just gone. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Just make it work at all first. Yeah, and then it's just a gradual process of making it suck less, as co-designer Rob Davio and I like to say.
Oh wow.
Let's make it suck a little bit less this time. Yeah.
All right. I think we got through our chat questions, so I'm gonna have a final call for any questions anyone would like to ask Matt before we wrap up the session. Um, Matt, I would love to give you an opportunity as well if you have anything that you'd really like to share with Game Jam participants or advice that you'd like to give them, or just a story that you'd be really compelled to share. Uh, floor is
I didn't
yours.
really come prepared with anything, but I'm just excited to see everybody like working on this. I mean, first and foremost, like developing a game, it was a great way to understand a subject like inside and out. I don't think people really get how difficult these things are to make. So it's great to see you all jump into this voluntarily, into this extremely fun bit of suffering that we all decided to take on. So that's great, especially with this topic. So yeah, I just encourage you to keep at it. It can be really rewarding, but it's also yeah a real marathon sometimes.
One of the people in the chat said that they wanted to mention the Pandemic was a really great game and inspired a board game that they started working on with some others. So Chris is interested in checking out Daybreak too.
Oh, great.
Where can they find Daybreak
Yeah,
these days?
it's available in most hobby game stores, and you can find it on the CMYK website as well. So if you just search for Daybreak board game, um, there's a whole website dedicated as well, so you can look up any of the 2 to 300 cards there and get information about it and find out where it's available.
I'm going to post a link to the website for anyone who's interested
Oh,
in
great. You beat me to
checking
it.
it
There you go.
out.
Great. Cool.
And then again, I'll post a link to the Daybreak blog as well, which just has so much valuable information on the entire process of designing a game like this.
You can also follow me on leacock.com. I've got a newsletter, and there's talks up there for other game-related topics that I've given in the past if people are interested.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. Um, I here's one final question for you, which is now that Daybreak's out, it's released, how do you feel having made a game about climate change? And like how would you say the experience compared to games on other topics that you've designed?
Well, it was such a big project. It was really rewarding when it came out and just got to see all the product design come together. Was very happy with the end result, and it was super gratifying that it was accepted well by both the climate community and the hobby game community. It got the Kennerspiel award in Germany, which is like the Oscar of gaming. So I was super psyched by that. It's been an award I've been chasing for my whole game design career. So that was super. It was wonderful. Just going there and showing up in Berlin and attending that. So yeah, I would say that it was a much more meaningful game for me than many of the others I've worked on. It's also takes a lot from you, a lot of time and energy, and so I can't do these like consistently, but I'm definitely interested in developing games that have a little bit more meaning to them and that have a something to communicate. I think that games are an art form that people are just beginning to open their eyes to as an art and as a type of like a communication medium. Um, yeah, I guess I would just say that it was rewarding, and I look forward to doing others like it. But it's not going to be something I take on every year, if that makes sense.
All right. Thank you again, Matt, for your time and for um, being open to so many questions.
Oh yeah, it's my
I
pleasure.
hope
Yeah,
everyone here got some value from hearing from Matt and have some new ideas uh, for ideation. And if you have any questions that come up that are like this would be a perfect question for Matt, then be sure to reach out to me in the Indicate server. And if we have some common questions, Matt, would it be all right if I reach out to you again?
sure. You feel free to shoot them over.
All right, super. All right, thank you all,
All right,
and
thanks.
I hope you have a great day.
All right, take care. Bye bye.